everyone, this is Kiki. Welcome to the Bleeding Metal podcast. I am your host, as always. My pronouns are she, her, and today I have the pleasure of talking with MALLAVORA. Welcome, you two. How are you doing? Please introduce yourselves.
Thanks for having us.
Hi.
I'm Jess. I'm the vocalist. My pronouns are she, they.
And I'm Larry, he, him.
Yes, it's so nice to meet you too. This has been some time in the making. We've been trying to schedule this for a few months now, since December at least.
Oh, really?
Really? That's news to us.
Oh, wow. Yeah, well, the thing is, it was also an idea of Sam, your PR agent. So yeah, shout out to Sam. He made this all happen. And thank you so much. Because in the podcast, we're very vocal about not only women in metal, but also all of the other personal intersectional feminism. So we are very vocal about LGBTQIA plus causes. We also try to be more inclusive, but this is actually the first time that we're going in a little bit of more depth about accessibility in concerts in the metal scene, for example. So that's kind of the main reason why we're here today. And it's been so difficult to schedule because I am currently in Ecuador, in South America, where I'm from, and I am volunteering. I do some volunteering now and again. And so the time zone difference is a little tougher to deal with sometimes. Yeah. So thank you so much. Tell us the whole story about yourselves. We can dive into your personal histories as well, if you like, from even before the band started. And yeah, did you two grow up surrounded with music? Tell us everything.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So the answer to that is yes. I did grow up surrounded by music, and personally was very lucky in that I had my dad, who took me to loads of gigs and festivals and things from when I was really young, was really kind of impressed on me that music was this really exciting thing that you had to be experienced live and was really important. And I kind of became obsessed with it very, very young, and then spent my whole childhood, teenage years trying to form bands and stuff like a lot of people do, and basically just never stopped. Yeah, I think a lot of people, they try, have a few bands at school or college or whatever, and then it doesn't, it doesn't work out, and then they move on. But I've personally just relented, and every time something's not worked, just move on to the next thing. And then fast forward to 2019, when MALLAVORA, as people know it today, was formed, and when we formed Jess. And that's the kind of the start of the MALLAVORA journey, really.
Yeah, and I grew up surrounded by music as well. Like, my dad's family is very musical. My dad's mum was an opera singer. My dad's dad was a violinist in an orchestra. They obviously were very musical. And so my dad is also very musical. Like, my dad's got an amazing voice and is just obsessed with music. So he played music pretty much constantly when I was growing up, and he would sing to me when I was very young and stuff. And the sort of music he was really into, and what I was really influenced by in very early days was 60s rock and roll and soul stuff. So a lot of Elvis, a lot of Chuck Berry, a lot of Sam Cooke, a lot of that kind of music was what I was growing up surrounded by. And I had quite a late introduction to metal, really. I was into plenty of rock, but really wasn't exposed to metal at all until I met Larry in 2017, and he kind of opened my eyes into the world of metal a little bit. And yeah, when I joined the band in 2019, we took quite a steadily heavier turn.
Yeah, for sure.
I think before, Larry and Ellis, our bassist, had felt maybe a little bit of pressure to fit into the scene that they were in Birmingham in the United Kingdom, which was kind of a little bit more on the indie rocky side of things. But it wasn't particularly authentic to them, and you're so metal influenced, and he's so such a metalhead that it was really kind of when we left Birmingham and decided to kind of come down to Bristol, which we've had a much better time in, interestingly, in Bristol. But that's when we kind of started to really lean into the metal stuff. And I started to learn to scream in 2021 or 2022. So I've only been screaming a couple of years. And I really just decided to start to learn to scream because the instrumentals that Larry was writing, I felt needed screaming over the top of it. So I was just like, I guess I better learn how to scream then, really, because I feel like that's what the music needs.
22 onward, like that's when I started to become unwell. So I have long COVID. I've had it for almost 3 years now. I had COVID like most people do during the pandemic and whatnot, but then just still haven't recovered. And as that started to have a really drastic effect on my life, on my ability to work and socialize, and having to give up on my hobbies and all these sort of things collapsing in my life, music was the one thing that I held on to, and in fact started to use songwriting, instrumental songwriting, I mean, to capture and process all of the feelings that were associated with this very difficult thing that I was going through. So inherently with that, that's why it all starts to get heavier and darker and frankly better. It went from music was something I really enjoyed, was really passionate about. But to be honest, before that, I was writing music that I thought sounded good, and it kind of stayed there. It was something to enjoy, and maybe, one day wanted it to be my career. But the emotional connection between myself and my writing was it was a little bit detached, if I'm honest. Then post and, during illness, it's gone to really, really strong connection between my personal experience and my feelings and the sonics of the music. And that's improved it drastically, and also meant that it's basically angrier and heavier and darker, which coincides with just wanting to learn to scream to kind of match the energy, I suppose.
Yeah. And also, I'm sure we'll get onto this in a bit, but also, me sort of learning to embrace my disabled identity slightly before, to be honest. Before you became ill, I was coming to terms with being disabled myself, and I was starting to introduce that into our music, and that's kind of where a lot of the rage did come from for me at the beginning, was sort of around trying to explore that side of myself. So it sort of ended up coinciding a little bit in quite an interesting way.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that. It's all such important personal experiences that make the music so rich, make so many people connect with it on such an emotional level. I think those are the stories that need to be heard the most, or we need to hear more of. And I'm a little bit curious also about your influences, because it seems like you have found your very own style with your third release out, and in such a short time, as well as a band. It's also even more impressive when you hear, or when I right now hear that you actually dove into metal full on, and then also started learning to scream, and everything has happened so fast. Which were your gateway bands, and what are you two listening to now?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah. As I say, music has always been a part of my life, and I've always done music in different forms. I've done bits of musical theatre. I've been in a funk covers band. I've done all sorts of different types of music, but had never delved into metal at all. And Larry spent a little bit of time trying to get me into metal and wasn't immediately successful. No. There was some bands that I can't really remember what they are now, to be honest, interestingly, but there were some bands where you would play them to me and it really didn't resonate with me. To be honest, I think it was probably your Metallica, Iron Maiden maybe type bands that I just didn't really get on with it particularly, and it didn't do anything for me or excite me. But the gateway bands for me, there's definitely a few standout bands. Rage Against the Machine was a huge one for me. I just love his screams. I think I'd just never been exposed to screaming that sounded like that. And I loved the tone of it. I loved how raw it was.
Yeah, the fry rather than the
sort of guttural stuff. Although I'm obviously doing that more. I'm doing the guttural stuff now. You've got to start somewhere, I think. Sure. Rage's screams definitely excited me, and I loved their political stances and stuff in angry music, and using rage in angry music. That's something that I was really on board with. Another band that I loved as soon as you played them to me, I think, was Hailstorm.
Yeah.
They were really influential for me, quite simply because it was a woman doing it. And Lizzie Hale's voice is incredible.
Fry screams.
Her fry screams, I just absolutely love her fry screams, and her melodic and her screaming vocals were just so exciting to me. And I just didn't really know that you could do that, I think, because I'd just not heard it before. Are there any other gateways? Those are the main ones. Now, the ones that we're listening to and really really inspired by at the moment are like Spirit Box, Loathe. You listen to a lot of Opeth.
Yeah. Well, we're going to see Opeth next week, which I'm pretty excited about.
Yeah.
That's a band that I've loved for a very, very long time. There's always, in every release of our music, I mean, there's always been something slightly more progressive in there. There's always been at least one track which goes in a slightly more progressive direction. The stuff that we're writing now is like, there is a lot more of that coming as well. Just something about being able to tell a story over like quite a long track and developing the ideas and the harmonies and stuff in the way they do is just, I just can't get enough of it.
Yeah. But I think part of what kind of makes our sound quite interesting is that it isn't just metal that we bring into the mix. I'm influenced by so many genres, and I'm listening to kind of melting pot of like things in my playlist. It's just like, I like country, I like, rock and roll, I like R&B, anything and everything really. And I'm not listening all day to metal. I'm listening to such a mix of stuff.
Yeah. And now that you mentioned R&B, I think it's having a very cool kind of crossover with Sleep Token and Sleep Theory and many other bands that are incorporating those elements, especially vocally, which I find really, really interesting. What you were saying, Jess, about the screaming part, I also think that in my personal experience as well, the false chord stuff is kind of easier to get into, and I can be so into try to achieve all those sounds. Such a journey to understand all of those different sounds as well as just tools of expression for oneself and inside the music. And it can become such like a rhythmic instrument as well. And that is a new perspective. And I think that it's really important, all of the research that is made to healthy screaming and all of those things. It's like finally we're starting to understand that screaming is not the super dangerous, voice-destroying devil that so many people thought it was.
Well, yeah, it's been around forever. I mean, if you listen to really like ancient music, or like sort of choral, like sort of war chants and stuff from like, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, it's not too far removed from like stuff that you hear in metal.
Even also if you just listen to babies screaming sometimes, like we've had that potential in ourselves since the beginning, and we just haven't really used it to express. And I mean, babies do express just their needs and their pain and their anger. And I do think that in the state of the world right now, we need to express the pain and the anger even more loudly. We are seeing the world maybe go back centuries in terms of human rights, and that is really scary. So I do think that music and art drive revolutions, and that it's so important to be vocal about all of these things right now.
Particularly with everything that's going on in the world right now and how scary everything is. Like, I know that something I definitely struggle with is like knowing my role in all of that and what I can do. We feel very much that it's important to make art during these times, and it's important to like capture the moment and how things feel right now. Like, it is important to get that down, and that's not wasted energy. And I think like that's definitely helped me, or is helping me at the moment, try and deal with obviously the anxiety that we're all experiencing right now. So yeah, like we definitely we have done for a few years, but particularly now our music is just it's a tool for us to help us cope. But it's something that we hope will have like impact when it's released, Can
you tell me then about your experiences both as metal fans and as musicians at concerts and festivals with your specific disabilities?
Yeah, well, I've been dealing with chronic illnesses for most of my life, but my health did decline probably about, 4 or so years ago. And I started using like mobility aids, like walking sticks for the first time. Before that, I didn't really realize that it wasn't normal because my conditions aren't visible. I was just sort of going through life, like really struggling. And that massively includes like at concerts, at festivals. I just find it physically just hugely challenging. I kind of assumed that everyone else was dealing with a similar thing. I did genuinely for a long time think that it was normal to be in that much pain, to be that exhausted. That was like starting to use aids, but it was definitely challenging doing that. For the first time, like I did really struggle with like using a walking stick psychologically. Like I had to deal with like attitudes of people not expecting like a young person to have a walking stick. So just like getting a lot of like, what happened to you? You're too young to be using that. People telling me it seems like your legs work fine, kind of things, like a fair amount of like ignorance and pretty wild comments, sort of unsolicited sort of comments. So for a long time, it did make me quite anxious about like going out in public and using it in public. And that includes, like, as I say, at gigs and festivals, but it has helped a huge amount because it does assist with making me less fatigued. Like it does support me physically. But, you know, the biggest thing that has kind of changed for me is like me starting to ask for accommodations, which I never used to do because, as I said, like I didn't really know that there was such a thing. Like, it sounds silly, but I didn't know that you could really ask for help or have changes made to make your things for you easier. And I also, as I say, assumed it was normal what I was dealing with. When I did start to say like, oh, you know, I could do with a seat, or could I have this help or this assistance and stuff, that has like made the world of difference. Yeah.
Yeah. And for me, like, it's super interesting. Jess kind of touched on it a little bit earlier that although Jess has been dealing with the conditions that she has for forever, effectively, it was only in the last few years that she started to talk about it, or even just like use the word disabled, which is a difficult thing in itself.
Yeah.
What's kind of been fascinating, interesting, and also challenging for me is that when that was all going on for Jess was maybe a year or so after that, I guess, started, was when I became unwell. Just when Jess had got to the point in her journey where she was starting to talk about being disabled in our music and using the expression of all of the feelings associated that with our music, and that being becoming part of the messaging and connecting with fans who have similar experiences and stuff. Around that sort of time is when I was really starting to struggle. And, you know, pre having COVID, I was what would be considered, you know, quite fit and well, you know, super active. And I used to do loads of rock climbing and I used to work loads and, you know, just kind of your standard mid-20s, but active, not sleep or rest kind of lifestyle. And as I started becoming really unwell and really struggling with how my body no longer works as it used to, kind of thing, and using our music as a conduit to like process and communicate that with people. At the same time, Jess is using the music for a very similar thing in her own way, which is really bizarre, to be honest. Ultimately, really helpful, but I'm definitely like quite significantly behind, or like sort of more junior in my journey with it all. And, you know, like I don't talk about it a whole lot. It's there in the songwriting, and it's, you know, it's all really, really raw, and it's not something that I've spent a lot of time talking about.
There are differences in our experience of illness and disability and stuff, and that's kind of part of what makes it so interesting. Like me kind of always being disabled, just not really coming to terms with it until later in life. And then there's the kind of acceptance of I'm going to be like this for the rest of my life, and, you know, that whole journey that you go on with that, compared with Larry becoming ill and having like a drastic change in his daily life. With the thing about long COVID is the feeling of like, you know, is it going to go away? Is it going to get better? Is it not? And so the sort of personal journey that you go on there is like a little bit different to having like a kind of lifelong sort of incurable thing that eventually I've kind of been able to try and embrace and have like some pride in and stuff. Like there are nuances to our experiences.
Yeah, definitely.
Because the way we write, Larry writes all the instrumentals, and then he hands it over to me to do all the vocals and the lyrics. So it's just kind of fascinating to understand the journey that you're trying to put down in your instrumentals, and what that sounds like, and what you were going through when you wrote it, and what you're capturing there. And then me understanding that from him, and then imparting my own take on that, and my own like emotional experience and personal like journey and stuff makes for like just
that's where the magic happens, I think. That's the sort of as difficult and as much as I would rather it not be this way, that's the gift of our circumstance that we have, is being creatives and both being able to understand what we're going through, although different to what we're personally experiencing, on a level that allows us to elevate what we are creating. That is like the only benefit. It is something that we are still learning how to use, but I think that is why the music has the power that it has.
Do you feel like you have, or maybe you're still in the process of reclaiming the word as a part of your identity, or just as a cause that you want to make people more aware of?
I feel like I've come a long way in like acceptance. Like it was really around May 2021 where I was properly grappling with that, considering the impact that my condition was having on my life and having to come to terms with that I couldn't do what other people could do. And like part of accepting and embracing your situation does mean like stepping back from things that you were maybe trying desperately to still manage when it wasn't realistically possible. And essentially what I was experiencing was just getting like sicker and sicker because I was trying to be like everyone else. I was trying to do the full-time job and like be really mobile and like do sport, have a big social life and like all of these things that I wanted to do, you know. But it was just making me more and more ill because I wasn't able to do it, essentially. And fast forward like 4 years or whatever, I do feel proud in having, you know, an identity as being disabled and knowing that that's a term that I use because of the barriers that are put in place in society. So the community, we say that we are disabled because there are barriers in the way that the world is structured and the way that society is set up that disables us, you know, and that's not to like dismiss or negate the difficult parts of my condition because my chronic illnesses are really difficult to live with just as a fact. But things would be a lot better for me if the world was like made to consider people like me, and at the moment it isn't. So a big part of like using the word disabled is about sort of asserting that like this is my experience in this world. And so it is like a big statement without even realizing that it is kind of a statement. And I think like people often feel uncomfortable with the word disabled. They think it's like they try and sort of say, oh no, you're not disabled, you're this, you're differently able, you know, you're I don't know. People use like euphemisms to try and avoid saying the word disabled because it makes them uncomfortable. But disabled isn't a dirty word. Like it's just a word to describe like the situation and the environment that we live in, basically.
That is super interesting. And it is a phenomenon that we have been seeing in the past years, like the different efforts of inclusivity. And while we try to be more respectful and considerate of all of the different identities that are marginalized, at the same time, some people tend to go to the extreme and to try to be too careful, and then it becomes awkward. And what you were also saying, there's still not a lot of information representation and normalization so that we all feel a little more comfortable and know more, and to make all those interactions easier. Things like long COVID as well is such a relatively new phenomenon. In 1 month, it's going to be 5 years of the lockdown starting all over the world.
That's crazy. That's so crazy.
Yeah. It feels at the same time like yesterday and at the same time like so many ages ago. The world has changed in so many ways, and at the same time, not really. So especially in things like concerts and the music industry, infrastructure-wise. Or I talked to Michaela from Yours Truly, an Australian band, in September, I think, of last year. And she's also a big advocate of invisible disabilities. And she told us that it's very important for the band to try to play in venues that are wheelchair accessible. And it was a very interesting venue that they played that night because it was on the second floor. The backstage was in the first floor. The entrance was, of course, one below even. And I'm not sure I saw anyone. I don't think I saw anyone in a wheelchair. And I am not 100% sure if there was a lift. But it's very good to know that bands are making that effort, that that their fans can feel invited and included, and their experience of the whole thing is being considered as well. How do you manage that?
Yeah, like we have reached a lot of disabled people around the world because of me being so visible, speaking out about being disabled, and on some of our music, you know, having that kind of messaging, and it has like resonated with a lot of disabled people. So there's a fair amount of disabled people in our audience, and we want them to be able to come to our shows. Yeah. We want to be able to play shows without being exhausted, without, you know, having our needs met. So we do make a big effort with our shows, particularly when we headline our own shows, to play wheelchair accessible venues, to put in like a variety of different things to make it more accessible for our audiences. So like we don't use strobe lighting. like have a break in the set so that people can like rest in the middle. We have like seated areas. Like for the first time at one of our shows last year, we had a BSL interpreter, so a British Sign Language interpreter. And we're always trying to kind of level that up and stuff to make sure that people can experience our music and like attend live events. But for us, like personally as well, a big part of what we're trying to figure out at the moment is how to be a touring band with the conditions that we're dealing with. And like, because at the best of times, like musicians' health and well-being isn't really considered in the industry. And like we see so many like major artists like being worked down to the ground, burning out and having to like cancel tours and things. And they're not really necessarily people that would identify as disabled, but particularly if you live with health conditions and you have various like barriers and stuff to being a touring artist, you do have to do a lot more work to make it feasible and sustainable for you. So that's like a big mission for us going forward, is to prove that it is possible to be a successful band with disabilities and health conditions and stuff. Kind of trying to change like the mindset and the outlook of, rather than like, oh, maybe you can't do it, to like, no, we're doing it. So let's like change our approach to make it possible. Because unfortunately, like we have seen a number of musicians like have to quit their careers because of health issues and disabilities, and that's because they've not been accommodated. Things haven't been put in place to support them, and we don't think that's fair, or that's just not good enough. But we care about this too much. We're going to do it. We're very much like this is what we want to do with our lives. It's not optional. It's not an option. So we have to make it work. Like we have to find a way that makes it doable for us.
Yeah. We don't really accept the idea that not participating is a solution. And when we're having discussions about touring and stuff, and there are some pretty ambitious things that we are planning.
Yeah.
We approach everything with the perspective of, we're going to participate. That's not a question. How are we going to make it work? What can we put in place? How much does it cost? How much grant funding do we need to raise? What support can we get from various people? Rather than looking at it through the lens of, maybe out of the month-long touring thing, maybe we only can do one show a week.
Yeah, just rather than telling disabled people that they can't do things, or if they can't do what everyone else is doing, they should just stay at home. We don't think that that's okay. Mm-hmm. So we think that disabled people can do anything with the right support.
That's amazing. And that leads me to the last question. How do you feel the most supported in the music industry? How can fans, press, bookers, festival organizers, gig organizers, etc. support you the best?
I think the answer to that is different depending on the group of people we're talking about. If we talk about the people who are most able to provide barriers to us doing things, which is like music industry, agents, bookers, labels, all these kind of people, the sort of overriding theme is don't assume that we can do something, but also don't assume that we can't do something. Something that we are aware of is because of we're a band that's vocal about all these kind of issues. Somebody who's maybe booking a huge arena tour around Europe might not consider us for it because they think, they talk about being disabled, so maybe let's ask somebody else, Maybe
they can't do it.
Yeah, which is frankly discrimination. So the sort of overriding theme is just ask.
Yeah.
Just ask. We will decide what we can and can't do. Or if we decide that it's a bit ambitious to do it, we will decide on a way around it and ask for support to make it happen, rather than assume we can't do something.
Yeah.
And, on the same token, for the industry not to expect too much of people beyond our capabilities. It's more about presenting the artist with opportunities and then giving them the power to decide what it is that they can and can't do.
Yeah, and say what they need and what they need in order to be able to do something.
And that should apply to everybody, really.
Yeah, it's not just artists, like it's professionals as well in the industry. Kind of at the moment, like the way the industry works, as I say, like health and well-being isn't really like a priority for anyone. And everyone suffers when that's the case. Like it's not just disabled people that suffer, but disabled people are visibly suffering the most in that sort of setup in that system. But it does affect all of us negatively. So yeah, as Larry said, like for sure, it's just like ask what you can do, give disabled people opportunities and work with them to make it possible. you know, when we're planning tours and when we're looking at scheduling and things for artists and their years and what it's all going to look like, what campaign's going to look like, work with the artist and make sure that their health is considered and their well-being is considered. Like, you know, we do get that a big part of the industry and the arts and stuff is really struggling at the moment, and like, money is a real issue, and a lot of the time things aren't profitable, and that's really damaging for the industry. But at the same time, a lot of the big players in the industry, like, kind of all comes down to their bottom line. They want to make money out of the situation, and it's you would be more sort of long-term profitable if your artist didn't burn out and have to cancel all their shows. So it's like, maybe if we consider like well-being and meeting people's needs and making sure everyone's supported from the get-go, yeah, all right, in the short term, you might see that you're making less money, but like in the long term,
your artist's career has just got twice as long.
In the long term, your artist can perform for twice as long because you're actually looking after them. And also, it's obviously just the right thing to do. That doesn't always speak.
Doesn't move the dial at all.
No, that doesn't always move the dial, does it? But yeah.
True. That's amazing. I do think also that applies to every industry, to every employee out there. Employers should know that and be really aware of that. I do think that it's the strongest kind of leadership, the one that asks, how can I support you so that you can do your job better? Yeah, more sustainably. Yes. Thank you so very much. This has been really, really amazing. I have enjoyed our conversation very much. And I also enjoy looking through your social media and watching the reels of this is how our disabled vocalist enters the video set and everything. And it's just, I love it. It's very empowering. I really like it.
Yeah, we like, you know, doing some provocative things. Like, we like doing things that are going to make people think, that it's gonna kind of spark conversations as well. Yeah. So
thank you so much. Where can people find you? What are you promoting right now? When are you touring next?
We released a brand new EP at the end of last year called Echoes. It's got 4 tracks. It's available everywhere now on all your different streaming platforms. You can find us on Instagram at MALLAVORA Music, and we're on TikTok and Facebook as well. And you can sign up to our mailing list as well, which you can find in our biography. That will give you all of the latest updates, new merch and exciting things that we're up to before everyone else. But for those who are based in London, we are playing a very special show called Mantra on the 24th of February. So make sure you get tickets for that. And we have a number of festivals coming up this summer. So just keep an eye on our social media and hopefully we'll catch you at one of them.
Hell yeah. Thank you so much. You can find us at Bleeding Metal Pod on Instagram. And yeah, you can also join our mailing list. Before social media turns into even more of a hellhole than it is.
We're just going to go back 15 years to people just emailing each other.
Yes, you can listen to the Bleeding Metal podcast on every platform. Tell your friends about it. And we will see you next time. Thank you so much, everyone.